Alexander Whitfield stood on the porch of a remote East Texas cabin, 12 days out from emergency appendix surgery, surgical staples still healing under his shirt, and watched his wife drive away into a snowstorm. She had just told him she was flying to the Maldives with her boyfriend, had taken every dollar from their savings account, and had already changed the locks on his apartment. The man in the passenger seat wore sunglasses in the middle of a blizzard, like he was already halfway to a beach. Meredith shouted her final words over the wind, climbed in, and gravel spit from the tires as they disappeared into the tree line. Alexander smiled because Meredith had no idea what was waiting for her at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in 6 hours. To understand why, you have to go back to the beginning. Alexander had spent 11 years building a life alongside Meredith. He was the chief operating officer and equity partner at Castellan Group, a commercial logistics company. He helped grow from 11 employees in a strip mall to over 400 people with distribution centers stretching from Fort Worth to San Antonio. They had a home in Preston Hollow, a lake house on Possum Kingdom, and a cedar cabin in the piney woods outside a small East Texas town called Winsboro that Meredith's father had left them. Alexander loved that cabin more than almost anywhere else on Earth. It was quiet and it smelled like cedar, and his phone never seemed to matter there. The marriage had been genuinely good for a long time. Sunday breakfast tacos, Cowboys pre-game shows, anniversary notes left on his desk at work. Every year on the date they met, Meredith would leave a single card that read, "Still worth it." His mother adored her. His sister Claire called her the best thing that ever happened to the Whitfield men. Alexander believed all of it, which is exactly what made what came next so hard to see coming. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning in September. Reviewing the joint bank statement over coffee, Alexander found a recurring charge of $340 a month to something called Elevate Wealth Circle. When he asked Meredith about it, she barely looked up from her phone. "Personal development stuff," she said. "You wouldn't be into it." He let it go. But then he noticed other things. She was going to a gym in Highland Park 3 mornings a week and coming home hours late. Her phone disappeared into her purse the moment he walked into a room. And she had started casually dropping a name he had never heard before. Preston, her coach from Elevate, she said, in a tone that made Alexander feel like the one who had forgotten something, rather than the one who had never been told. He did not confront her. He did not snoop through her phone. 11 years running operations for a company that moves freight across 9 states teaches you that the person who reacts first almost always loses. Instead, Alexander called a law school friend named Grant Dequa, who ran a family law and asset protection practice downtown. Grant did not sugarcoat it. Hypothetically, he said, you get a forensic accountant before you get angry. The forensic accountant was Nadia Okafor, a CPA who specialized in quiet financial excavation. It took her 11 days to hand Alexander a report that changed everything he thought he understood about his marriage. Elevate Wealth Circle was not a coaching program. It was an unregistered investment fund, promising 18 to 22% annual returns through what its marketing called diversified alternative assets, language designed to mean nothing and hide everything. Over the previous 11 months, Meredith had wired $61,000 from an old brokerage account, in her maiden name, directly into Elevate's operating account. And the man running it, the Preston she mentioned like an old friend, was not named Preston at all. His legal name was Dale Kessler, a man with civil judgments against him in Arizona and Nevada for running unregistered securities schemes and, as of 6 weeks before Nadia's report, an active FBI investigation out of the Dallas field office for wire fraud spanning 4 states. His entire playbook was the same every time: charm affluent, unhappy women in wealthy suburbs, position himself as a wellness and investment guru, move their money into accounts he controlled, then vanish to the next city before the walls closed in, and Meredith was not just a victim. The transfer timeline told Nadia something darker. 2 of the wires from the joint account were initiated the same week Meredith first started using Dale's first name at dinner. She knew. She just did not know yet that Alexander knew. He sat with that report for a long time, not loud, just still. Then he got to work. Over the following 6 weeks, Alexander moved quietly and precisely. He met with Grant 3 times after hours and drafted paperwork for an irrevocable trust, moving roughly $2.4 million of personal equity distributions into it with Grant as trustee protector. Completely legal, completely documented, and entirely out of reach of any future community property claim. He left $38,000 in the joint checking account, untouched and looking exactly as it always had, because he wanted Meredith to believe she was stealing the real thing. He went to Castellan's chairman, Walter Bishop, and arranged a structured equity buyout and resignation, effective the following spring, making sure his ownership stake was liquid and protected before the marriage became public wreckage. And then Grant filed something Meredith never saw coming, a sworn petition in Dallas County Family Court for an emergency restraining order against dissipation of marital assets, filed under seal, based on documented evidence that a spouse was actively transferring shared funds to a man under federal investigation. The order was signed by a judge on a Thursday afternoon. It would take effect the instant it was served, freezing every joint account and every joint card simultaneously. All they needed was the right moment. They did not know yet that the moment would be an airport. Then came the appendix. On a Sunday night in late October, Alexander was rushed to Baylor University Medical Center and woke from emergency surgery with staples across his abdomen and Meredith holding his hand. For one dangerous hour in the hospital, he let himself wonder if he had read everything wrong. Then, 2 days later, still on pain medication, she suggested the cabin. "You need quiet," she said. "No stress, just rest." He agreed, partly because a recovering body does not argue well, and partly because it fit his plan better than she could have known. Grant and Nadia both knew exactly where he would be, and exactly when the restraining order needed to be ready to serve. Being isolated in a remote cabin would make Meredith believe she had a clear field to move on her own timeline, completely unaware that her timeline and his were about to collide. What he did not plan for was the cruelty of what she actually did once they arrived. A cold front had blanketed the piney woods in snow. Meredith spent the first night heating soup on the wood stove and tucking blankets around his shoulders while he dozed on the couch. Then came the long phone calls on the porch in the freezing cold. The 5-hour grocery run. Via text from Grant on Alexander's satellite communicator, cards showed activity near Winsboro this morning. Hold position. And then, Thursday afternoon, an unfamiliar Ford Explorer pulled up the gravel drive. Dale Kessler stepped out wearing sunglasses in a snowstorm. Meredith walked out behind Alexander, carrying a duffel bag she had packed in secret. 2 weeks of firewood and food. Every dollar of your savings. The locks on your apartment changed. His phone taken from the nightstand that morning. A man 12 days out from abdominal surgery, left alone with no vehicle and no cell signal, 200 miles from Dallas, in the snow. They drove away. Alexander went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled a waterproof case from the bottom of his own duffel bag. Inside was a Garmin InReach satellite communicator he had bought years earlier for deer season and never mentioned to anyone. He sent 2 messages. The first to Grant, "She's made her move. Serve the order the second the cards get used." The second to Hank Doolan, a retired game warden who had looked after the cabin property for 20 years, and whom Alexander had quietly called 2 days earlier to ask if he could swing by Friday to check the wood stove. Hank showed up Friday morning in a truck with tire chains, took one look at Alexander's face and the staple line under his shirt, and drove him 40 minutes into town without a single unnecessary question. That afternoon, Alexander sat in Grant's office on speakerphone with Nadia and watched 6 weeks of preparation finally reach the moment it was built for. Meredith and Dale had booked a Qatar Airways flight out of DFW, connecting through Doha to Malé, the gateway to the Maldives. What Meredith did not know was that Nadia's forensic report had already been shared with federal agents who had been building their own case against Dale Kessler for nearly a year. They did not need a tip to know who he was. They needed to know where he would be. Grant got the call just after 6 that evening. Meredith had walked up to the Qatar Airways counter in Terminal D, credit card in hand, and watched it decline. Then a second, then a third. Every account she and Dale had access to went dead in the same instant. While she stood there panicking, 2 FBI agents from the Dallas field office approached the counter and asked Dale Kessler to step aside. He did not run. There was nowhere to run. He was standing in an international terminal with a boarding pass in one hand and arrest warrants from 3 different states waiting for him. Meredith was not arrested, but she was served right there at the gate, in front of ticket agents and a full security line, with a divorce petition, a restraining order, and a Dallas County Constable's card. She never made it past the checkpoint. She never made it to Doha. In the months that followed, Nadia's forensic report became central to the federal fraud case against Dale Kessler, who now faces charges that could put him away for close to 15 years. It also became the foundation of the divorce settlement. Grant argued successfully that Meredith's documented dissipation of marital assets into an unregistered fraud, combined with abandoning a spouse recovering from major surgery in a remote, snowbound property with no transportation or communication, constituted clear grounds for a disproportionate division under Texas law. The judge agreed. Meredith walked away from 11 years of marriage with roughly 9% of what an equal split would have given her, no claim on the trust, and a legal bill that took the better part of a year to pay off. She sold her half of the Preston Hollow house, moved into a rental in Frisco, and went back to doing leasing work, right where she had started before she decided the marriage was not enough. Alexander's resignation from Castellan closed out that spring exactly as planned. His equity converted into a structured payout that, combined with the trust, gave him more financial independence at 41 than most people see in a lifetime. He opened a small logistics consulting firm in the West Village, and for the first time in years, every decision he made was entirely his own. He still owns the cabin in Winnsboro. The divorce settlement transferred Meredith's share to him outright, what Grant called the cost of leaving a man to freeze. Hank Doolan still checks on it every winter. And last December, Alexander drove out there alone with no urgent reason to be anywhere else, just to sit on that porch again and remember what it felt like to watch a set of tail lights vanish into the snow and know, with absolute certainty, that he was going to be just fine. His sister, Claire, who flew in from Houston when everything became public, told him that the version of him she grew up with would have chased that car down the driveway screaming. Maybe an earlier version would have, but the man who spent 11 years moving freight across 9 states had learned something his father had told him long ago at a kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of black coffee. The person who wins a negotiation is the one already prepared for the outcome before the other side even knows there is a negotiation happening. Alexander did not react loudly. He was just already 3 steps ahead before anyone realized there was a race.